Thank you very much for inviting me, for the nice words that you said. In fact, we are celebrating this year the 25th anniversary of a very important event, and that was the World Psychiatric Association in 1999, just when I became president. It decided that it would make Stigma a most important project which they will carry out. And within the next year or two, there were about 18 countries which have started doing programs of different descriptions. And it was a delight to see people, how many people came forward and volunteered to work with this program. And I think it was at that time, only one national program, which was in New Zealand, but the other countries sprang up to do something. Some of them have sent delegates who were working with us. For example, Professor Stefanis, who was a Greek psychiatrist, he happened to become also the Minister of Health. And while he was the Minister of Health, he invited the European Union Ministers of Health to come to Greece and to declare at that time that stigma is a problem that the European Union must take seriously. Maybe they'll listen to him, I'm not quite sure. But there is a hope that they have done or remembered something, because more recently in the Netherlands, the ministers of health of all European countries came together and declared stigma to be a big thing that they should attack. Similarly, it happened in Paris during the more recent meeting 2 years ago, where they took stigma as their main topic of discussion. But I have more good news for you. There's a number of countries in which anti-stigma programs have started, and they are listed here. As you can see, they cover all continents. They are everywhere. And I think that not only that these happen in countries which are rich and have a good budget, etc., but it also happens in countries like Uganda and Kenya and various other countries where they are preparing and starting a program. In fact, I'd be delighted. We have at the time in 1999 decided that every 2 years we would have a meeting on Together Against Stigma. And we hope that the next meeting on Together Against Stigma, which will bring all these countries together, will be taking place in India. And on that occasion, I think we shall have an opportunity to meet our colleagues who have done remarkable work against stigma also there. I just came back from another meeting, which is brought together what is called the GASA group. The GASA group is a number of organizations which work against stigma. It's the Global Alliance of Anti-Stigma Programs. And these are reporting wonderful things, and I'm very delighted to see this. There's more also in the United Nations, and this is a very unusual thing. I've never experienced that it will happen. The United Nations have started a program about helping people who are working for the United Nations and have a mental illness and cannot do it properly because of stigma. Because maybe somebody in their family attempted suicide, or because they themselves had a problem from which they were treated, but they come back, they cannot work. So the United Nations have finally taken cognizance of the fact that stigma, as a patient very often will tell you, is worse than the illness itself. It blocks you in everything. It makes you totally nobody. And I think that that is something that finally they have started to understand. Now, it is highly probable, unfortunately, that stigma will grow, that there will be more of a stigma and we'll have more problems, partly because of increased competitiveness, so that anybody who is potentially maybe less able to work, etc., will have much more problems than they have now. And the sophistication of work increasing all the time will also lead to the fact that even minor problems will make it difficult to find an employment. I'm not even mentioning people with, who are very often forgotten when we are meeting like this, which is people with various types of delays of mental development. There are, after all, about 400 million of them in the world, and nobody speaks about them. When you speak about health, they're somehow left out, although they have 4 times more illnesses of all types than people who do not have a delay of intellectual development. So I think that there is undoubtedly, particularly for that group, it may be more difficult to find jobs. And as they don't have jobs, they will probably also have a self-stigma, which will further reduce their employability, but also diminish their quality of life to a very significant degree. Now, it is also true probably that the growth of private and for-profit health organizations will also reduce the opportunity to get people to get a job when they have had a mental illness. And we were recently in a meeting of leaders. They invited me to speak about stigma. There were a number of them who were leading companies and various other things. And they said, yes, you're quite right. This is something that we should fight. I mean, stigma is terrible. So I asked them, how many of you have employed a secretary who had a mental illness in the course of your entire career? 0. So somebody said this earlier nicely, people are happy to propose change, but are not very happy to change themselves. And that is something that we should keep in mind. Now, there are other reasons as well, which I think will probably lead to an increase of stigmatization. The one is this curious, terrible word that is written there, commoditification. It is a word that has been invented by the World Bank. The World Bank said, we have to understand that everything is a commodity. Sugar is a commodity, iron is a commodity, health is a commodity, everything is a commodity. So that we cannot really talk about health in terms of some which are not related directly to money. Everything must be expressed in money. A hospital functions well if it's making a profit. If it doesn't have a profit, it's not functioning well. Never mind that all the patients come out of that hospital praising God and thanking very much that this was such a wonderful time that they had it and people are wonderful. No, if it wasn't a profitable opposition, it's not a good hospital. And you go throughout and you see more and more the increase of people who really treat health they treat it as a commodity. And in a way, the central paradigm of medicine, that medicine is a vocation where people have to serve a higher goal, has become a profession in which they have to reckon how much money they will make and for what. And I think that that is a big factor that will also contribute further to the ease with which some conditions will be stigmatized. Now, in many countries of the world, urbanization has become very rapid. And not only has it become very rapid, but also completely overwhelming the capacity to adjust. In Argentina, for example, now 95% of the population lives in towns. That's one aspect of it. But the other aspect, which is even worse, is that most of those people have come to towns in the last 25 years, which means that nobody knows anybody else. And those who already live in towns, they don't trust those people who are coming into towns. And so they not only have a different culture, but they are also completely separated. And what we previously in many countries saw as being a community that is with which you can talk, in which you can convince to do something, has stopped being a community with which you can talk and with which you can do something. And this breaking up of communities, which is in partly due to, large part due to urbanization, is something that we should have to think about. Parallel with the restructuring of families, the Archbishop of Edinburgh, who is a very charming man, I asked him once about this, and he said, we have entered into the era of serial monogamy. Because people change wives and husbands very frequently, and children do not quite know anymore who is their mother, because there are so many mothers that have passed by. And it's changing the very nature of society, and changing also the nature of communicating certain attitudes, or creating ways in which people learn to be members and citizens of countries in which they have a duty to help their country, and which the country has a duty to help them when they're not well. Increasing complexity of labor, I already mentioned, is another factor that makes me think that maybe there will be more trouble as we go along. Now, I do not want to depress you anymore, but it is very likely that there are various risk factors that, in fact, lead to the probability that stigma will become more present. All 4 types of stigma. Self-stigma, where people will feel that they're unable to do anything, and they don't even go and look for a job anymore because they're so convinced that nobody will ever employ them. What they call the social stigma that hits the family like a unexpected major disaster and whole family, particularly in countries which are of a lower income. The fact that you had a grandmother who killed herself means a tremendous lot for your employment. And there's a whole range of these social stigma. And then, but also the structural stigma, that is the stigma which is incorporated into the laws of the country, which makes people behave in a certain way, even if they wanted to be more open and and more accepting. There are certain countries in which you cannot get an employment if you have ever, not only you, but also your parents had a mental illness. And nobody is changing these laws as we go along. Now, so with all this trouble that is before us, we have to ask ourselves, are the postulates which we have made forward about 20, 25 years ago, are these postulates still valid? Is it there something that we should think about, the postulates about fighting stigma, that we should change? The first way, postulate that is known to everybody, the best way to proceed, please be rational, is to make long-term plans and base the work on the results of scientific research. That has been with us as a postulate that is very important. I think it's wrong. It's gone. First, you want to build programs of stigma where there was no research before. So what do you rely on? You stay and you do first research for 15 years. By the time that you finish your research, the situation has changed already. So it doesn't help you very much. You will have this research, but it will be too late. The opportunity will have gone by, maybe to start the program. Then there is also the fact that many of the epidemiological studies, which would be very helpful, unfortunately deal with the whole population, with the representative of the whole population. But stigma is not whole. It is present in smaller places, and different places must be given different types of programs if you want to reduce the stigma. Because although they are in the same country, they have different histories, they have different composition of people, they have different ideas, different schooling, so many different things. So you cannot accept an epidemiological survey of the whole country as being a guide for a program against stigma in a particular village or a particular town. And then I think that it is also terrible that many of these programs, we are looking at the epidemiological studies, but we do not ask people who have experienced mental illness, nor their families, what disturbs you most? What is it that you really feel is the most terrible thing for you? You don't ask them. So the program as such, to build it on that, I think would be probably wrong. It would deal with things that are not the right kind of things that we should be going for. And I think there is an important strategy which has been called the strategy of enlightened opportunism, which is that you take every single opportunity that exists and you start your program because there is an opportunity. Maybe it will not be a perfect program, but if, like we had the example in Pakistan, since the daughter of the then president had a mental illness, we were able to build a program against stigma because this daughter at that time was sick. Not because we were very clever, but he was very sensitive. It was an opportunity that emerged. We didn't have data to start on it, but it was possible and necessary, and it was successful that you use the opportunity. And I think many of the stigma programs must be used using opportunities. It's nice if you have data as well, but if the opportunity, political opportunity emerges, one should do something about it at the time. So with much regret, I think we will have to dispose of this postulate. Let's look at the second one. Second one is that the effectiveness of programs should be measured by the change of attitudes to mental illness. We should create different attitudes, that people should not have this terrible rejection and other attitudes which they have. Is it good? Is that a good postulate? No. Because attitudes do not always predict behavior. You know, there are people who say, oh, I'm absolutely for everybody with mental illness should get a job. Would you like to give him a job? No, not me, but I mean, you know, in general, that should be done. So attitudes are useless. You change attitudes, but people behave in a way that is different. And I think that that's one of the things which is very important. And you should never allow anybody to declare how successful his program against stigma is unless he can show you, have you changed the law? Are there more people who are experience of mental illness who are now working? Are there more children who go back to school? There are many things that you can measure, and the success of programs must be measured not by change of attitudes, by the change of the real situation for people who have experienced mental illness and their families. Another one that was famous is, if we could only improve the knowledge of people about mental illness, things would change so wonderfully. people would know that these are nice people despite of their illness, and that the illnesses go away and there is a chance that we can help them. Once we convince them, this will work very well. Well, not so. In Spain, for example, we have done surveys in which we have given people a lot of new knowledge. But there is a specific phenomenon which is called selective memory and selective perception. And this particular thing is that people hear and remember anything that is in harmony with what prejudices they have. So that if you have somebody who believes that people with schizophrenia and the diagnosis of schizophrenia are murdering other people, then you will come to them and you will say, for example, out of 100 people with schizophrenia, only 3 will commit a murder. While among the normal people, 9 will commit a murder. They will not remember the 9, they'll remember the 3. Because that is in keeping with their prejudice, that they remember. So you must be extremely careful in providing knowledge, because people don't remember everything of your knowledge. They remember what suits them to remember, what in fact is keeping in harmony with what they think. And I think that the other thing is that in many places where we have had groups that work, when we ask them, what do you really need? They say, please tell us, help us to learn how to deal with a person who has a mental illness. What is the simple way of, the best way to do this? And I think that providing knowledge on how to manage problems that may emerge is a much more useful thing than providing information about epidemiology or various other things. And that is something that we should keep in mind when we are doing these programs. We have also been saying that if we manage to place people with mental illness into their community, it will be possible to destigmatize psychiatry, because people will say that here these people who have a label of being a treatment for mental illness, they are quite nice people, and so that will destigmatize both psychiatry and these people. And we've done several surveys to see whether this is true, and we found that this is not very true. But in addition to all of this, what I said earlier about the communities gradually disappearing plays a very important role, and we don't really know how the new communities, how does information travel in those communities? Who speaks to whom, and what do they say to one another? And I think that that is something that we should... I remember this morning, Professor Konus was here, and he spoke about Lausanne, where many years ago we have done a study to see whether children of migrants have more mental illness than children of the local population. No, they have less. Nobody believed us, because that is not what was expected. I mean, this is not something that you should do there. But the communities as such, I think, are in such a bad state now that I would not want to hold this postulate any longer. And now, there is one important thing which is currently established with great clarity, and which unfortunately is not taught. And that is that most of the important concepts that we have about the world around us are created between the 3rd and the 5th year of life. It is like this. I mean, if you look at a child of 5, it will know that there are various animals, big ones and small ones, and ones that run fast and others that don't run very fast. And all of these animals, enormously different, of different colors, different hair, etc., as long as they bark, they're dogs. They know that all of these barking things that are so different are dogs, because the concept of a dog has been created in the 3rd year of life. But not only the concept of the dog, the concept of dangerousness. What is dangerous is created 3rd, 4th, 5th year of life. And these are the years which are enormously important, and by and large, they are called also the terrible years, if you remember, because children look for information which will enable them to live in the world which is so very complicated. They have to find a way to create concepts that will make it possible to know that all these dogs there which are barking are the same animal. And since that is such an important period, you would expect that schools and parents and everybody will do a lot during these years. They do nothing. It's the years of emptiness. The parents look after them only part. Very often a nurse is invited to come and look after the children. In Saudi Arabia, people complain because their children don't speak Arabic any longer. They speak Filipino, Tagalog, because the Tagalog nurse is looking after them. We are paying tremendously little attention to the 3 to 5 years period, which is such an important way in which people create their image of the world and they create their rules by which they will behave in this particular world. Equally so, even in the earlier time, there are countries in which they say, well, perhaps it's important to recognize that parents, mother and father, should contribute to the education of the child, not to its knowledge, to its education. If you remember, Aristotle said there are two kinds of things that happen. One is that you get the facts, which is acquisition of knowledge, and the other one is that you be educated, which means that your character will be shaped and so forth. Now, unfortunately, these 3 years, 4 years, in many of the families are not even liberating the father and the mother to spend some time educating their child, teaching them about the rules, about the ways in which they can incorporate themselves into society. No. These are years in which we completely forgive our child. In the earlier years, you remember them something because they keep crying, but there in these 3 years, they don't, and we are not doing sufficiently for it. And I think that we should also use the enormous capacity to learn in the first and second year of life. We have done in Pakistan again a series of plays in which children who were 6 years and 7 years of age, just in the first year of their training, maybe in the second year as well, they were participating in dramas which they were playing themselves. And we have introduced into these dramas various contents, including the content of accepting people who are different. They are different by shape, different by color, different by language, being different. And these children were amazingly malleable. It was very clear that one or two of these games made a major difference. Now, one could think a little bit more about what do we have to do in the early years of schooling to make children become citizens who want to accept other citizens and other people in the world. It's given very little. I know of no school in which particular attention is given to reduction of disregard for people who are different. And yet that is the time that it should be done. Now, another postulate that we had was that well-focused campaigns against stigma are the best way of reducing it. You will by now already know that I'm going to say, no, this is not true. And that's what I'm going to say. Because the short-term campaigns leave very little trace. This, I remember a colleague of mine who was doing a program, and he was talking to some people. He said, please don't do this program. Next year we will have a campaign against liver disease, and then we have a campaign against something else. No, just leave us out. Don't include a campaign against stigma. This is wrong. The most important and the most effective way of reducing stigma is social contact with people who have experienced mental illness. There's nothing that is more powerful. And I think that we should significantly increase. It's not only that it helps to decrease stigma and discrimination, it also gives a tremendous feeling of satisfaction to people who participate in this program. We have done it in various countries in which we have to, sometimes it's necessary to teach the person who has experienced mental illness how to speak and describe this, but we do it. And the change that you have in schools and other places when they hear a person who looks so well and he speaks about having a healed, they don't believe it in the beginning. But the impact and the way in which they behave from there on shows quite clearly the social contact in which you see somebody who has had a mental illness and it looks that this person can talk like anybody else. All of these things are tremendously malleable and changeable at that time. And I think social contact is probably the most important measure that we can take against stigma. And it's possible in many ways, and it should be done at all times. Now, another one of the postulates was we should do the anti-stigma messages at the largest possible audience. So in streetcar, mental illness is like any other illness, or somewhere else it should be written like that. But we have discovered that that is also wrong. People remember that there is such a thing hanging there, but they don't change their behavior because of it. They just know now there is a new period, they are doing something else in the streetcars. And I think that it is because populations have different needs. If you want to convince judges that they should behave differently when they have a juvenile delinquent before them, you must talk to judges, not hang a thing in the telephone, in the tramway, to say judges should behave in this or the other way. Different people should be specifically addressed with campaigns. Let us say we want to do this, we want to make sure that judges are, so create a program for judges. Make it sure that they themselves understand what kind of action there are and in what way they should behave. We saw a remarkable change in behavior in policemen after we spoke specifically to policemen, not the whole population, but relating the information which we wanted to give to the job of the policeman, which meant that I didn't speak. It was a policeman who brought facts and brought examples and spoke with the language which other policemen understood very well. They don't understand me very well. And so I think it's in that way, trying to see to what an extent you can get people who are enlightened to help by talking to their own group with a language which they understand very well. So here is a comparison of all this, a summary, if you wish, of these various things. I think that previously we were talking about that we should select our targets and for program planning on the basis of evidence which is obtained in studies. Today, we say no. You should build your programs having talked to people who are most concerned, people who have experienced mental illness, near families, doctors who work with them, various people who are engaged in the process of being engaged in the process of mental health programs to decide what you're going to do, where you're going to start your program, what will be its main emphasis. We thought previously that the program should be addressed to the population at large. We know now, no. We should address our program to specific groups of people. We should take the trouble to think, how do we educate children? How do we educate policemen? How do we deal with judges? How do we deal with people who are running companies? Because they want different information, each one of these groups. They know different things, they need different information, so we have to give it to them. We said that the programs against stigma, previously we were thinking that normally approximately 3 years is about right. We now know that that's completely useless. People have a spark of change and very quickly this spark disappears. So we really have to think, and that is for something that one has to convince also leaders of health programs and health services. There must be a budget for stigma which is permanent, because new stigma is all the time created with new situations. And you have to think all the time, how do I bring the attitudes of people with whom I work or who are there in harmony with what I want to be doing, in harmony also with the needs of the people who are most concerned. We have said that previously that we will evaluate the programs by the change of attitudes. I think I illustrated that that is not so. We should really think about changes in behavior, changes in laws, changes in the budget. Then we will believe that something has been changed. We have been talking about educating families and carers and others in population, but gradually now we understand that one important factor is that we should ask people who have a family member that is not well to come as a teacher, not as a student. Because in medical schools, a person who comes and says, my son is having such and such illness, the kind of information that a parent can give is enormously more relevant than what the doctor will say. And I think it's important to include the teaching by people who had the experience or whose relatives had the experience in a variety of places where teaching is being done. It is, of course, true that we should also provide some information which is relevant, but the main emphasis should really be different from what it is now. We would like, and I think it's important to stop thinking about the attitudes of the general population and start talking much more about the elimination of discrimination, which is one of the worst consequences of stigma. If the stigma had no consequence in discrimination, we could say, all right, man, that's just bad. But now it's not only bad, it's deadly for people, all of the people who had a mental illness, for people who are their family, and many others, their friends who are concerned. And finally, I think that we should think that the eventual goal of the anti-stigma program is not to increase tolerance for people with mental illness. The final goal is to include people who have mental illness and their families among ourselves, because they are just like we are. And I think that goal is much more important than thinking that we should be tolerating. I'm tolerating stones in the road, and I'm tolerating many things. That's not what we are talking about. What we should talk about is how do we make these various people who are different, so many different ways, become one part of a society, one part of ourselves in this time. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think stigma remains, in my opinion, the main obstacle to mental health care, particularly in countries with low income and low resources. I think the first part and the first step in doing an anti-stigma program is to ask yourself, am I, in fact, also having prejudice? Am I also having a feeling that I can stigmatize these people? And many people will be surprised about what they would not want to do. And they are not clear in themselves where they stand in their attitudes and in the way in which they would be doing things. And I think, therefore, we should start from ourselves and make our contribution from ourselves to do something. And I just want to assure you that we have tried the programs against stigma in an unbelievable number of settings. It works everywhere if just people want to do it. Thank you very much.